Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video of the Global Awareness Report. In the situation around Bakhmut, the Russian forces have captured a majority of the city and they are pushing towards the railway station here in this rail line that runs through the city. As the winter is continuing in Ukraine and as Bakhmut is still covered in snow, I believe, the Ukrainian defenders have been pushed back quite a bit since the last time we reported here. And it appears that Bakhmut is going to be under the control of Russian forces soon if the rate of advance keeps up like this, because they've advanced at a very rapid pace over the past week, capturing a huge chunk of the city in just 7 days. So if that rate is kept up, then they would probably control pretty much all the city by next week. Although I'm not saying that is what is going to happen, but if the Russians keep up this pressure, it's not going to be good for the Ukrainians still inside of the city fighting the Russian forces. And there is not a whole lot of news on other parts of the front. It appears that both sides are mainly concentrating all of their attention and forces around Bakhmut. There are some minor updates around Avdiivka. Fighting is still going on in this city, and the Russians have captured this rail line here, this chunk of the rail line leading into Avdiivka. But other than that, not a whole lot of advances compared to Bakhmut, that is. And I believe that's going to do it for this section of the Ukraine war, because talking about this anymore would require going into individual detail about like city blocks, and that's, not in the scope of this YouTube series. So we're going to move on to the geopolitical updates, and we're going to start off with a Wall Street Journal reporter, Gershikovich, has been charged with espionage by the Russian Federation. So the Russian Federal Security Service investigators have formally charged Evan Gershikovich with espionage, but the Wall Street Journal reporter denies the charges, saying that he was working as a journalist, domestic news agencies said on Friday. So the FSB said on March the 30th it had detained the reporter in the Ural city of Yekaterinburg, right over here, and it had opened an espionage case against him for collecting what it said was state secrets about the military-industrial complex. So this is even more tension between the United States and Russia brewing here, as Russia has charged, as Russia is charging American journalists, or at least journalists working for American companies, and he's probably going to be sent to prison, and he's probably not going to be sent back to the United States if he is from the United States, actually. I'm not entirely sure if he is an American. Oh, yes, he was raised in New Jersey, but he moved to Moscow in late 17. So he's basically been raised in America pretty much his whole life. But he is probably going to be sent to prison, and he's going to be and this is going to be quite bad for Russian and US relations, as they continue to just deteriorate even more so, and the chances of any kind of rapprochement between the two countries is getting slimmer and slimmer as the war in Ukraine rages on, and as this Cold War mentality of both countries is sort of being brought back to the surface. Next, we're going to move over to probably the biggest news story, at least definitely one of the biggest news stories of this year, is that Finland now is officially a NATO member. Finland joined NATO, the military alliance, Thursday, dealing a major blow to Russian President Vladimir Putin with historic realignment of Europe's post-Cold War security landscape triggered by Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. The Nordic countries' membership doubles Russia's border with the world's biggest security alliance. Finland has adopted neutrality after its defeat by the Soviets in World War II, but its leaders signaled that they wanted to join NATO after Moscow's invasion of Ukraine sent shivers of fear through its neighbors. The era of non-alignment in our history has come to an end. A new era begins. President Zula Niceto said before his country's blue and white flag was raised outside NATO headquarters a short distance away. Outside the security fence, a few dozen people wrapped in flags of their own chanted, "Ukraine needs NATO." So this is a huge development in terms of European geopolitics and global geopolitics as a whole. Obviously, Finland shares the biggest border with Russia out of any NATO country. And now that it has joined NATO, there will be troops stationed across this border, and there will be troops stationed very close to the extremely important city of St. Petersburg, as well as both Finland and Estonia, which control the Gulf of Finland. They will be able to easily block any kind of movement from St. Petersburg to the rest of the Baltic Sea if they so wished, if any kind of conflict were to arise with Russia. So this is a huge deal in geopolitics. Sweden has also obviously wanted to join NATO, but it is still unclear whether or not Turkey will allow that to happen, as they are the main actor behind blocking Sweden and Finland. Only just recently has Turkey given its approval for Finland to join NATO, and that's how they've been able to join. So, very big news. This is a major blow to Russia, as it puts even more pressure on Russia having such a huge border to guard against with NATO. And in other news regarding Finland, the Conservative Party in Finland won the election in the country on the 2nd of April, where the right-wing populists won a record 20.1% of the votes. This is in addition to the Swedish Conservative Party also winning. I'm not sure how long ago that was. I believe it was in September 2022. The Swedish Conservatives also won. So these Nordic countries tend to be quite left-leaning. They tend to vote in Social Democrats in their governments, but Sweden and Finland, probably as a result of the Russian war in Ukraine, they have decided to elect more right-wing governments, more governments that will promise, more defense spending and a tougher stance on foreign policy. That's probably one of the reasons why, which is why I decided to include this piece of news. Next, we are going to move on to the Middle East, where Turkey has attacked an airport in Kurdistan, and Iraq has demanded an apology. The Iraqi government called on Turkey on Saturday to apologize for what it says was an attack on the Sulaymaniyah airport in northern Iraq, saying Ankara must cease hostilities on Iraqi soil. The Iraqi president said in a statement that Turkey had no legal justification to continue intimidating civilians under the pretext that the forces hostile to it are present on Iraqi soil. In this regard, we call on the Turkish government to take responsibility and present an official apology. So more tension between Iraq and Turkey as Turkey continues its anti-Kurdish operations in the north of Iraq. There are no troops in the north of Iraq, but there are obviously drone strikes and airstrikes that can be conducted, and Iraq cannot really do a whole lot about it without really angering Turkey. And Iraq doesn't want to anger Turkey too much, so there's not a whole lot Iraq or the Kurds can really do about this, but more tension in the Middle East as the tension in Israel and Palestine continues to boil, and now we have even more tension between Turkey and Iraq, and between Iran and the United States, as the United States deploys a guided missile submarine to the Fifth Fleet stationed in Bahrain. The United States Navy has deployed a guided missile submarine capable of carrying up to 152 Tomahawk cruise missiles to the Middle East, a spokesman said Saturday in what appears to be a show of force towards Iran following recent tensions. So this is just one submarine, but it is a nuclear powered submarine. I'm not sure exactly what class it is, but this obviously comes as Iran is significantly deepening its ties with Russia and China, and as Iran has moved to reproach Saudi Arabian relations and to try and build relations with Saudi Arabia once again. And speaking of which, in Beijing, top Iranian and Saudi envoys met in Beijing to restore diplomatic ties. The foreign ministers of Iran and Saudi Arabia met in Beijing on Thursday in the first formal gathering of the top diplomats in more than 7 years, after China brokered a deal to restore relations between the two regional powers. We covered that in, I believe, 2 episodes ago in the Global Awareness Report. After years of hostility that fueled conflict across the Middle East, Iran and Saudi Arabia agreed to end their diplomatic rift and reopen diplomatic missions in a significant deal facilitated by China last month. And this is no surprise as they have, just agreed to reopen relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia have agreed to reopen relations, so this comes as no surprise as they're meeting together. But the fact that they are meeting in Beijing is what's significant here, because China is continuing to build itself as a global player in stability and in security, where traditionally the United States has been the sole country to guarantee global security. But now China is trying to do the same thing, although instead of deploying military troops around the globe, they are mostly focusing on a diplomatic effort. China is doing this, of course, because their main source of energy is Middle Eastern oil. So the stabler the Middle East, the more stable China can be. And even Western countries such as France are in a way recognizing China's emerging dominance as a global security maker, I suppose you would say. As the French President Macron has said, China has a major role to play in a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron said on Wednesday that China has a major role to play in finding a path to peace in Ukraine as he kicks off a 3-day visit to Beijing. Speaking at a gathering of the French community in Beijing ahead of the meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, On Thursday, Macron said France would seek to work with China in shared responsibility for peace and stability in Ukraine. China, with its close relationship with Russia, which has been reaffirmed in recent days, can play a major role, he said, noting Beijing's stated opposition to the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine, as well as its proposal for peace between Kiev and Moscow. The French president's first trip to China in 4 years is set to be dominated by the conflict in Ukraine, with an official from his office telling reporters that he would seek to stand firm in talks with Xi Jinping. So countries around the world are going to start to recognize that it's not just the United States that can guarantee peace, but China also can forge peace and forge peace deals between nations and countries, and it's gaining a lot of influence, especially in the Middle East recently, which has most likely put the U.S. on edge, as the United States has traditionally, of course, been the main power in the Middle East, but now it looks like China is trying to overtake them in a way. But we are going to move on to even more news in East Asia, as tension between the United States and China continues and just continues to escalate more and more, where the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, visited Taiwan as China protests and visited the Taiwanese president, San In-wan. So, risking China's anger, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy hosted Taiwanese President Tan Sein-wan on Wednesday as a great friend of America and a fraught show of U.S. support in a rare high-level bipartisan meeting on U.S. soil. Speaking carefully to avoid unnecessary escalating tensions with Beijing, Tsai and McCarthy steered clear of calls from hardliners in the U.S. for a more confidential stance towards China in defense of the self-ruled island of Taiwan. So they stood side by side at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in California, and they had a long conversation. So China's response to this was to send a carrier group off the coast of Taiwan and to start live fire drills near Taiwan. So, Taiwan's defense minister said on Wednesday a Chinese aircraft carrier group was in the waters off the island's southeastern coast the same day the president was due to meet the U.S. Speaker in Los Angeles. The U.S. House Speaker in Los Angeles. China, which claimed democratically governed Taiwan as its own territory, has warned of unspecified retaliation if the meeting goes ahead. This was on the 5th. Now, on the 8th, they started live fire drills near Taiwan, so that was probably what they were talking about when they talked about retaliation. A Chinese warship in the seas facing the Taiwan Strait began live fire drills on Saturday as Beijing launched military exercises it calls a warning against what it considers pro-independent forces in Taiwan. The amphibious landing ship, capable of carrying troops and vehicles, fired multiple artillery rounds in the Liaoyang Bay on the coast of Fujian Province, about 50 kilometers or 30 miles northwest of the Matsu Islands near the mainland that are controlled by Taiwan. As well as 42 Chinese fighter jets also briefly crossed the sensitive median line of the Taiwanese Straits on Saturday. Taiwan's defense minister said it had spotted 8 Chinese ships. So that is what was China's retaliation against the Taiwanese president visiting United States top officials in Los Angeles. was live fire exercises. So this is very concerning because there has been so much tension between China and the United States as of late. If you just look back at all of the previous episodes that we've done, pretty much every single one has something to do with China and the tensions between China and the United States. I can't really remember one that hasn't really had anything to do with that. So China and the United States are just continually to grow more and more confrontational with each other, which is not good at all for regional stability or global stability. That is something that I have noticed over the past few months. But at the same time, countries like France are recognizing China as as not necessarily legitimate player, but as a player in global diplomacy and global conflict resolution. So pragmatically, countries are going to sort of have to recognize China as a genuine force when it comes to conflict resolution and things like that, while also having to balance that with the United States, which wants countries around the world to take a harsh stance against China, implementing sanctions and things like that. So countries are probably going to have to try to strike a balance between the United States and China. And few countries are sort of taking one side or the other. There are countries that are taking a very pro-Chinese stance and a very pro-US stance, but I think most countries are going to try to strike a balance between the two in the future as tensions between the two powers rise exponentially. We're going to wrap it up here soon, but in economic news, very important economic news, Malaysia and China are discussing an Asian fund to cut US dollar dependency. China is open to talks with Malaysia on forming an Asian monetary fund, said Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, revealing reviving a decades-old proposal to reduce reliance on the dollar. Anwar, not Anwar, Anwar, my apologies. Anwar said he's proposing to set up the fund at the Bo Ayao Forum in Heian last week, stressing the need to reduce reliance on the dollar or the International Monetary Fund. This also comes as Brazil and China, I believe, also are in talks or made some kind of deal to try and reduce dollar dependency. And we reported during the World Economic Forum in Davos this year, Saudi Arabia said that it was open to the idea of trading trading its oil in other currencies besides the US dollar. So there is a substantial push right now for that many countries are trying to cut dollar dependency and are going to trade in their own currencies and trade in other countries' currencies, and mainly China's currency. They're going to try and build reserves of China's currency, it looks like, and they're going to set up rivals to institutions like the International Monetary Fund, which I believe is a part of the World Bank, and the World Bank is an American organization, an American institution. So they're trying to cut to dependence not only on the dollar, but also on U.S. monetary institutions like the World Bank and such, and the International Monetary Fund. So that is also increasing tensions between China and the United States, and it's not a good sign for the United States as one of the biggest sources of power America has is the fact that the United States dollar is the world reserve currency. Has also led to the United States having very good interest rates on its debt. the United States is in, over $30 trillion of debt. However, because the US dollar is the world reserve currency, that debt is not very concerning because they don't have to pay a whole lot of interest on it. But regarding this last piece of news here, I just wanted to talk about this. The DOJ is investigating the apparent leak of classified Pentagon documents regarding the war in Ukraine. A lot of military bloggers on YouTube and other places are talking about this, and a lot of people who are following the war are talking about this, but I personally don't believe that this is a authentic document, but the U.S. officials have said that Russia is likely behind this so-called leak. Some people are saying that the documents are probably some kind of disinfo campaign. Others are saying that it's legitimate, but in my personal opinion, I don't think that there's a lot of validity to these documents. But it is interesting that they are investigating the leak of these documents, and they haven't. I don't think any statement has opened that they don't think any statement by any official said that the documents were fake yet. I don't think any statement like that has come out. Yeah, the only statement I've seen is this statement right here. We are aware of the reports of social media and posts, and the Department of Defense is reviewing the matter. That's really the only statement we've gotten from any official source. So we'll have to see if these documents are valid or not. I don't think that they are, in my personal opinion. I've looked at them, I've looked over them. It's hard to tell, but in my personal opinion, these are very high level documents. It's pretty easy to find them. They're all over Twitter, Telegram, and YouTube. These appear to be very high level documents, and the fact that they were just leaked out like this is very unlikely, although it is technically possible. I don't, but I have my doubts. I'm quite skeptical about if these documents are real or not. I think, in my opinion, the most likely scenario is that this is a disinfo campaign to try and embarrass the United States, probably by Russia or pro-Russian actors. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Global Awareness Report. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.